Jackson County Chief Deputy Ross Mellinger had spent years responding to calls in West Virginia. He thought he had seen everything this job could show him. When he walked into the basement of an apartment in Fairplain on October 3rd, 2016, just before 5 o'clock in the morning, he went silent. He would later testify in open court that what he found in that basement was something he's never been able to stop seeing. The small community of Fairplain.
Sentencing in this case will take place at a later date. This is a story that we've been following for 2 years, and we will continue to follow this.
A place where front doors were left unlocked and neighbors still know each other by name, would never forget what happened inside that apartment. And the state of West Virginia would never forget the name of a 10-month-old girl named Emily Elizabeth Behringer. Months later, when the medical examiner's findings were presented in a Jackson County courtroom, law enforcement officers who'd worked violent crimes for years looked away from the screen. Before this morning was over, a statement would be made inside that apartment that investigators would spend the next 3 years trying to fully understand. That statement would eventually help put a man in prison for the rest of his life. Today we're going to examine the documented case of Emily Elizabeth Behringer. Not only to remember her, but to understand how the adults in her life failed to protect her, and what her passing ultimately changed about the laws governing child protection in West Virginia. This is educational material about how a child can be placed in danger inside her own home, and about what happens when a community demands accountability. This is a story about systemic failure, about legal consequences, and about a 10-month-old little girl who deserved better than she received.
Jury has found Benjamin Taylor guilty of his girlfriend's 10-month-old baby, Emily Behringer.
Emily was born in December 2015 in West Virginia. She was 10 months old when she took her last breath, barely old enough to pull herself upright, to babble the sounds that would have become her first words, to reach for the faces she recognized and trusted. Her family called her Emmy. She was a beautiful baby with bright, curious eyes and a head of soft, light hair that was just beginning to grow. Those who knew her described her as a joyful child, the kind of baby whose smile could brighten even the darkest room. Amanda would later say that Emmy had a way of reaching both arms straight up whenever she wanted to be held. Not crying, not fussing, just lifting her arms and waiting, completely certain that someone would come. And someone always did, until the morning they didn't. Emmy had a laugh that started slow, a little exhale through her nose, and then burst out of her all at once, the kind of laugh that made everyone in the room laugh with her, whether they meant to or not. Her older siblings knew that if they made that sound happen, the entire house changed. She had one particular habit that her grandmother never forgot. When Emmy was tired but fighting sleep, she would grab the nearest finger, whoever was holding her, and squeeze it once, then relax her entire body like that was the signal she needed to finally let go. Her grandmother said she did it every single time, like a little handshake, like she was saying goodnight. She was only 10 months old, and she already knew exactly who her people were. She knew her mother's voice the moment she heard it across the room. She knew her siblings' faces. She reached for them. She trusted them completely. That's what 10-month-old children do. Emily lived in an apartment in Fairplain, Jackson County with her mother Amanda Adkins and her older siblings. Amanda was a young mother doing her best to hold her family together. She'd recently begun a relationship with a man named Benjamin Taylor, known to friends as Benji, who had moved into the home. Taylor was 32 years old. He had a prior criminal record for grand larceny, but nothing violent. Nothing that would raise a red flag. His family described him as someone who loved children, who was good with kids, who had a son of his own. He was, to all outward appearances, a normal man trying to build a life with a woman that he cared about. But appearances, as we will soon see, can be devastatingly deceiving. Meanwhile, Emmy was learning the routines of the household, the sounds, the faces, the rhythms of a home she was too young to question or understand. Sunday, October 2nd, 2016. By all accounts, it was an ordinary day in the Adkins-Taylor household. Taylor began drinking beer around 2 in the afternoon. Over the next 10 hours, he consumed approximately 8 beers. He and Amanda had also been smoking marijuana together the night before. By the time the evening wound down, the household was settling in for the night. Around 9:30 p.m., Amanda took her other children upstairs to put them to bed. Emily, who wasn't quite ready to sleep, remained downstairs in her baby swing. She was wearing only a diaper and a onesie, her bright eyes likely following the movement of the swing as she drifted towards sleep. She had no way of knowing what the next few hours would bring. In an apartment nearby, a neighbor named Barbara Kay was awake that night. She would later testify that she heard Emily crying. She got up, she considered calling 911, then the crying stopped and she went back to bed. Shortly after 10 p.m., Taylor decided to go to the basement to do some laundry. He took Emily with him. According to Taylor's own later testimony at trial, he laid the infant on the carpet in the basement. He continued to drink beer, listen to music, and, as his phone records would later reveal, browse the internet. At approximately 2 a.m., phone records showed that Benjamin Taylor was still awake in the basement. Emily was with him. She was 10 months old. What happened in the hours that followed is documented in the medical examiner's report and in the physical evidence collected by investigators. The findings told a story that was, in the words of the prosecutor, impossible to explain away. The evidence spoke for itself, and it completely dismantled everything Benjamin Taylor would later claim. Just before 5 a.m., Amanda Adkins woke up. She went downstairs. She found Taylor in the basement standing near her daughter. Emily was unresponsive. What Amanda found when she reached her daughter sent her into a panic that the 911 dispatcher would later describe as one of the most difficult calls they had ever received. Amanda began performing CPR on her infant daughter and called 911. The recording of that call, the sound of a mother's hysterical screams, would later be played for the jury at trial. It's not something you forget. When Jackson County deputies arrived at the scene, they noted something that would become significant at trial. The basement door leading to the outside was locked. Only Amanda Adkins had a key to that door. No one had entered. No one had left. It was just Taylor and Emily. The deputies also noted that Taylor did not appear intoxicated. Despite his later claims of a complete blackout, the first responders who looked him in the eyes that morning saw a man who was present, coherent, and aware of exactly what he had done. Blood was found on his stomach. He was immediately taken into custody. Benjamin Taylor was charged with 3 counts: first-degree murder, death of a child by child abuse, and abuse by a guardian or custodian. He was held without bail. Due to the intensity of public outrage and credible threats against his life, he was required to wear a bulletproof vest to every court appearance. Paramedics had rushed Emily to a nearby hospital. The medical staff worked desperately to stabilize her. For 2 days, Emily clung to life on life support. Jackson County Sheriff Ross Mellinger, who was the chief deputy at the time of the attack, later testified about what he witnessed in the morning. His words have stayed with everyone who heard them. On October 5th, 2016, the heartbreaking decision was made to remove Emily from life support. She took her last breath in her mother's arms. In a final act of grace amidst unimaginable evil, her organs were donated to save other children. In the weeks that followed, investigators built a case that was, in many ways, airtight. The physical evidence collected by investigators, from the scene, from Taylor's clothing, and from the forensic examination, directly contradicted the story Taylor would later tell under oath. The prosecution's forensic case was built not on any single piece of evidence, but on the totality of what investigators found and what it collectively proved. Body camera footage from the responding deputies showed Taylor inside the apartment with blood on his stomach. His phone records placed him actively browsing inappropriate content in the hours before Emily was found. But the most damning evidence didn't come from a laboratory. It came from Taylor's own mouth. While the community of Fairplain was grieving, while Amanda was learning to exist in a world without her daughter, Benjamin Taylor was on his phone. He made a series of recorded calls from the Jackson County Jail, and in those calls, for the first time. The mask came off. In one recorded call, Taylor apologized, but then drew a careful distinction between what he was admitting to and what he was charged with. In another, he acknowledged that he deserved punishment for something, but insisted the specific charges against him were wrong. Prosecutors argued that the distinction revealed more than Taylor intended. A man with no memory of what happened, they said, wouldn't be making careful distinctions about the nature of the charges. The calls were damaging, but one call stood above all the others in its sheer cold-blooded calculation. When Taylor was informed that Emily's organs had been donated and that a viewing was being planned, he responded, "The reason why I think that's a good thing is because then they don't have much evidence." Emmy, the baby whose laugh started slow and then burst out all at once, changing the entire room. She was 10 months old. Prosecutors argued this wasn't a man who blacked out. This was a man who was calculating. The trial of Benjamin Taylor didn't begin until March 2019, nearly 2.5 years after Emily was gone. The delay was due in part to multiple changes in defense counsel. Taylor's original attorneys withdrew from the case, reportedly because colleagues didn't want to get involved. He ultimately went to trial with the single defense attorney, Tim Rosinski. The prosecution was led by Assistant Prosecutor Katie Franklin, and from the moment the trial began on March 13, 2019, in Jackson County Circuit Court in Ripley, West Virginia, it was clear that the state had built a formidable case. Amanda Atkins took the stand and testified about the morning she found her daughter. She described the blood, the silence, the terror. The prosecution played the recording of her screaming inside the hospital, a sound that reportedly shook the courtroom. A neighbor, Barbara Kay, testified that she had heard Emily crying that night and had considered calling 911. She had initially told police she heard nothing. At trial, she couldn't explain why. Somewhere in that basement, a 10-month-old girl was alone in the dark and no one came. She was Emily. She was the baby with the infectious laugh and the bright, curious eyes. She was 10 months old. She never got the chance to become anything other than exactly who she already was. The DNA evidence was presented by forensic experts. The defense argued that the science was not definitive enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But the prosecution countered with the totality of the evidence, the physical evidence collected from Taylor and from the scene, the locked basement door, the phone records showing inappropriate content searches at 2 a.m., and the jailhouse phone calls. Then came the moment that many observers had been waiting for. Benjamin Taylor took to the stand in his own defense. He claimed that he had suffered a lengthy blackout that night, caused by drinking beer and smoking marijuana. He testified that he woke up in the basement sometime in the early morning and saw Emily gurgling in front of him. He said he administered 2 breaths of CPR. He said he didn't know what had happened to her. When the prosecutor asked him directly whether he had assaulted and murdered Emily, Taylor looked at the jury and said, "I do not remember. And then, if I can't remember, I can't say one way or another, but I know it wasn't me." The prosecution dismantled this claim methodically. Franklin pointed out that Taylor had acknowledged using his phone throughout the night, texting, browsing the internet, searching for inappropriate content. You can't use a phone with that level of coherence and then claim a complete blackout. She showed the jury Facebook posts from Taylor's own page, memes joking about pain, painting a picture of a man whose private thoughts were far darker than his public persona. She also highlighted a text message that Taylor had sent to his brother Zachary on the morning of October 3rd, shortly after Emily was discovered. The message read, "I'll be dead sometime." Not a message of grief, not a message of confusion, a message that read, to many in the courtroom, like a man who knew exactly what he had done and what was coming for him. On March 19th, 2019, the jury in the Benjamin Taylor trial retired to deliberate. They had heard 4 days of testimony. They had seen the physical evidence, heard the jailhouse calls, watched Taylor take the stand and claim that he couldn't remember. They deliberated for approximately 2 hours. Then, they came back, guilty, on all 3 counts. First-degree murder, death of a child by child abuse, abuse by a guardian. The jury recommended no mercy. meaning Benjamin Taylor would never be eligible for parole. As the verdict was read, Taylor broke down into tears. He wept openly in the courtroom, but for the people who had sat through 4 days of testimony about what he did to a 10-month-old child, those tears weren't for Emily. They were for himself. On April 4th, 2019, exactly 2 years and 6 months after Emily was taken, Benjamin Taylor was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus consecutive sentences of 40 years for child abuse resulting in death and 10 to 20 years for abuse by a guardian. He will remain in prison for the rest of his life. The loss of Emily didn't end with a verdict. It didn't end with a sentencing. In many ways, it was only the beginning of a larger conversation about how West Virginia and the nation protects its most vulnerable children. In April 2017, just months after Emily was gone, West Virginia Governor Jim Justice signed a piece of legislation into law. It was called Emily's Law, and it was named directly after the 10-month-old girl from Fairplain. The law doubled the penalties for parents, guardians, or custodians convicted in the death of a child. Before the law, the maximum sentence for child abuse causing death was 10 to 40 years in prison. Under Emily's Law, that penalty was increased to 15 years to life. The law was codified in West Virginia's Code Section 618D-1A. It's a direct, tangible consequence of one child's suffering. Her name is now written into the legal code of the state, where she took her last breath. In February 2026, West Virginia lawmakers introduced a bill that would go even further, reinstating the death penalty for cases involving the murder or abuse of a child. Legislators cited Emily's case as a primary catalyst for a bill. The conversation that her loss started hasn't stopped. Benjamin Taylor's appeal to the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals was filed in 2020 and decided in January 2023. The court affirmed every aspect of his conviction and sentence. Taylor had argued that the trial should have been moved to a different county because the case was too well known in Jackson County. The court rejected that argument, finding that Taylor had failed to demonstrate actual prejudice. He remains in prison, serving a sentence that will only end with his death. We can look at the law that now bears her name and understand that her suffering wasn't entirely in vain. That the legislators who stood up and said, "This cannot happen again without consequence," were standing up for her. That every child in West Virginia who's now better protected because of Emily's Law is, in some small way, a part of her legacy. Before you go, if you believe these cases deserve to be examined and remembered, subscribe to the channel. Every subscriber tells the platform that this kind of documentary journalism matters. And if you want to continue the conversation, drop a comment below. Do you think the neighbor who hurt Emily should have called emergency services? The case of Emily Behringer is a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a boyfriend. Sometimes it looks like someone who claims to love the family that he's destroying. If you know a child who has become suddenly withdrawn, who stops eating, who flinches around a particular adult, whose behavior changes in ways that feel wrong, don't assume that someone else has already made the call. One report made in time can change everything. Don't let a polished social media profile tell you that everything is fine behind closed doors. The people who hurt children are often the same people who post the most loving photos. Be a voice for the children who can't speak for themselves. If you're concerned about a child, contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. They're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and calls are confidential. Her name was Emily Elizabeth Behringer. She was born in December 2015. She took her last breath on October 5th, 2016. She was 10 months old, and she deserved better. Every December, her family marks the month she came into the world. The baby with a laugh that changed the entire room. The little girl who lifted both arms and waited,